Welcome, 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 everyone, as you slowly enter the room and join myself and my good friend Ron DeJesus. My name is Jared Coseglia. I am the CEO and founder of True Staffing Partners, and we specialize in data privacy, cybersecurity, e-discovery, AI governance, anything that really touches legal technology. We like to get ourselves involved in, and we represent talent and opportunities for. And we get together once a quarter with our good friend Ron over at Transcend, who is the world's first field chief privacy officer and probably the most jet setter that I know personally or professionally in my life. Ron travels all over the world, talks to chief privacy officers and leaders in corporations near and far. And I enjoy his perspective, opinion, and value it so much, as well as his collaboration with us here on this webinar, which will focus on AI, governance, and privacy, and the intersection of both from a technological and job market perspective. Ron, say hello to all of our viewers and welcome to the show.
Happy to be here again, Jared. I look forward to these quarterly meetups where we dive deep into AI governance roles. So happy to get started here.
Yeah, let's dive in because we've got a ton of data. We're probably going to take some tangents on today's call because a lot has happened since we saw all of you back in, I think it was September, right, Ron? We've got new leadership coming into the White House here in the United States. There have been several big key sort of privacy governance conferences with a lot of conversations coming out of them that Ron and I are going to share our perspectives on what we're hearing and seeing in the community. But really, this webinar is meant to focus on not just privacy, not just AI governance, but that intersection. And so we're going to show you some data that is new data that we've been amassing here at True and analyzing here at True to try to provide some guidance and leadership to both hiring managers and job seekers about what's happening at the intersection of AI governance and privacy and why it's happening. And maybe more importantly, what to expect from the future, because I think we've got some clear predictions as to where we see things headed and why they're headed that way. So let's jump into the impact of AI governance on the privacy job market. Some of you may have seen the recent report put out by the IAPP, and it sort of amasses this theme, which is privacy and at the end of a long sort of configuration, it's sort of come to privacy and AI governance, right? There are a lot of these other little things that are coming into play, but what we're seeing as a consistent theme, and certainly what the IAPP is professing, is that there's going to be a convergence of these skills with AI governance and privacy. Where I think, Ron, and here's going to be our first tangent, where I think we may have some differing opinions is how much of that is going to be driven by regulation. And before we dive right into some real metric data about privacy and AI governance jobs, maybe let's just wax poetic for a second, since we're only 3 minutes into our webinar, about
Perfect time too.
yeah, well, let's get into what I know is on a lot of people's minds, right? Because it's still fresh, at least here in America, on our minds. This new leadership is going to bring in a radically different set of policies, a radically different potential government. And the core theme of that I keep hearing that resonates with me is deregulation. And as we know, the last surge we saw in the privacy job market was post-COVID recovery, but before that was GDPR. And that regulation set in a new era for data privacy as a community, as a profession, and certainly for the job market. Is the EU AI Act going to have the same impact as GDPR? Why? Why not? What is deregulation here in the US going to do to affect investment in privacy programs? Tell us your thoughts, Ron.
Yeah, it's this concept of the Brussels effect, which I talked a little bit about with my good friend at the FPF, Gabriela Zanfir Fortuna, who, essentially what that is with GDPR, we saw this basically global proliferation of data protection laws that were based on the principles of the GDPR. We're not actually necessarily seeing that with the EU AI Act, so I would call it somewhat of a reverse Brussels effect, if you will, where, especially in the US, where yes, we had, the White House order and we have two states that have, or two or three states that have put something on the books with respect to AI, but we're not seeing this excited acceleration or jump into that space just yet. And I think, to your point, Jared, with this incoming administration, we're going to see even less of an appetite for it, and more just focus on innovation and making sure that we're at the forefront of AI innovation. So yes, I think we're definitely going to see the effects of the administration, not only on privacy law but also on any AI regulation that might be coming out. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree 100%. And the two really are intimately connected. And it is sort of a global strategy for growth, right? When we just look at how do countries collect and amass debt, and how do they grow their GDP, and how is one relative to the other. And clearly, the strategy under the new administration in the United States is going to be to strengthen the growth. And we should all look at that as how does that affect and impact our privacy programs? What I'm seeing happening is, privacy leaders who have the opportunity to own both privacy and AI governance are asking themselves questions like, do I want to own both? Should I own both? Do I stay in my lane in privacy? How do I now manage two programs if I am going to potentially own both? And how do I go and advocate and evangelize for resources, whether they be technology or talent, in order to do that effectively? And we're going to break down sort of what we're seeing people do and why, and what they're willing to pay to do it to get talent. So MT, we can move to the next slide. These are by the numbers. So True is having ongoing conversations with north of 250 chief privacy officers. Ron and I both came back a couple of weeks ago from a Consero conference, a chief privacy officer forum, where we probably socialized with more than 100 of them and both presented. What we're finding is 90% of CPOs are now saying they're involved in AI governance, and they're spending 25 to 50% of their time on AI governance, which is up from this time last year, which was around 15 to 25%. We talked to some chief privacy officers that are spending 100% of their time now on AI governance, some 75 to 100, but the bulk is 25 to 50, which is a lot. And about 5% of CPOs say their programs are adequately staffed. So clearly, nobody is adequately staffed, which sort of makes sense in the narrative of why the number one motivator for privacy pros for 14 months running, when they come to true staffing partners for representation, is burnout. They're running two programs, or they're running one program so lean that they're working hours like they would at a consulting firm, as opposed to maybe this myth of in-house corporate life being the highest quality of life available in our space. So that's definitely not what we see happening out there. Is high degrees of quality of life and data privacy. It is high demand that can equal a lot of hours. And it's also meaning sort of splitting your time in different ways. Ron, are you sort of seeing these same trends when you're talking to leadership out in the marketplace?
Completely aligns. And I was out in Brussels for the IPP DPC, and I kind of like this kind of slope that you have here of like, yes, broadly speaking, 90% of CPOs are involved in AI governance, 25 to 50% time spent. And then, yes, most folks feel that or sorry, yeah, most folks feel that their programs are understaffed. And I saw that resonate at the conference. A lot of folks were struggling with getting this additional hat and just dimension of responsibility without the resource or the additional FTE, or even just outside spend on folks that could come in and help. So definitely seeing that out on the field, and it's an issue that we're all dealing with, unfortunately. So
And connecting that need for buy-in and then struggle to get it to some of these broader trends that we talked about as it relates to deregulation. Think like your CEO. Better yet, think like your CFO, and think about where they're going to allocate resources based on regulatory wins, changes in politics, changes in economic stature. The NASDAQ and the Dow are at the highest they've ever been. The S&P is the highest it's ever been. People are flush with cash all of a sudden. People are going to be looking to how they spend that cash in 2025, and it's probably not going to be on risk mitigation. And what I really experienced around a Consero is sort of this aha moment when I asked what I thought was a really dumb question. I'm glad it wasn't. But how many people that are in leadership and privacy are presenting to their stakeholders risk mitigation analysis and matrix, right? Which are pretty commoditized. We all know what that should look and feel like. versus a missed opportunity matrix. And what I mean when I say missed opportunity is who in privacy are going to their stakeholders and saying, hey, we could have done something here. We actually didn't take advantage of an opportunity. That we're allowed to communicate with these people in this state, in this way, in this volume. And if we do, it may then lead to outcomes that have customer retention or revenue generation. And we're going to work with marketing to help them open up what they can do for the business. And here are all the ways that we can do that. There are very few privacy leaders that are matrix reporting that kind of missed opportunity analysis. And I just think as we head into this deregulated world where AI and opportunity and business impact are the focus, that's going to carry more weight with stakeholders to get budget and buy-in for headcount than fear-based risk mitigation approach. Ron, your thoughts?
Absolutely, Jared. I think as again with the, I guess not the threat of deregulation, but with this anticipated change in the culture of compliance, it's going to be up to us to demonstrate to our executive teams where we bring value, right? If it's not simply with complying with XYZ law, it's how does Ron as a CPO bring, you know, not only just this sense of compliance, but how do I contribute as a profit center to the business, right? So again, not just being this roadblock, but identifying, and to your point, I think a missed opportunity analysis is a brilliant way of demonstrating value, right? Showing to the executive teams, here's areas where we can have a risk-based discussion around opening up more opportunities in this jurisdiction. Why can't we be a little bit more aggressive here? So yes, I think just overall, it's up to us to demonstrate what we do above and beyond just compliance and start to really show executive folks what the value that we bring above and beyond just ticking the box. So
and this is exacerbated, and correct me if you feel differently, by the fact that despite what regulation and laws we do have, there hasn't been enough enforcement or enough teeth on the enforcement to really send fear into the hearts of CFOs across corporate, America and beyond. And because of that, plus the deregulation, we've got to change the way we're approaching our stakeholders, and we've got to find ways to make it positive, opportunistic, and value add, as opposed to fear, risk, fees, fines, because I just don't see that working as a way to grow your practice or your program in the next few years, or it will be harder, I think.
absolutely agree. And I think focusing on how privacy enhances a business's reputation, optics, etc., is really going to help drive that discussion for sure.
MT. Next, we're going to take a look at privacy and AI gov jobs versus job seekers. And all this data is sort of to demonstrate a singular thesis that we believe to be sort of the problem in the AI gov privacy intersection job market, which is nobody knows what these jobs really should pay. Nobody knows how they should be defined or compartmentalized in AI governance. And the skill sets they want for AI governance roles are largely pulling from the data privacy protection talent pool. But the jobs don't pay enough to pull the people out of that space into this one when we start bifurcating responsibilities. So let's see how that all plays out in the data. This is pure privacy jobs. We call this true with an E, privacy jobs, because we've sort of deduped ones that are the same job in different locations, or been reposted by companies that's the same job. They just reposted it so it wouldn't show that it was available for 6 months. And you can see, and we only did the first 3 quarters of the years because this year's not over. So we just wanted to show sort of first 3 quarters of the last 3 years, how many jobs are posted online for privacy pros. 41,000 in the first 3 quarters of 2022. This was a peak for the privacy business, akin to GDPR in 17 and 18. We see just how low it dropped in terms of jobs posted in 2023, and in 2024, it's actually been lower. I'm of the mind by the time we get to the end of the year, it'll actually start showing that it was higher than last year, because at the fourth quarter, we've seen a big uptick. But again, extreme difference between 2022 and 2023 and 2024. And I think this is probably a little disheartening, particularly to a lot of transitioning career privacy or AI governance pros, or entry level trying to break into privacy, many of whom I think have gone and gotten certifications in order to leverage that certification as a way to get a job. And what we're seeing is that community that doesn't have experience but may have certifications is going to have a much harder time breaking in than they might have in 2022 based on the volume of available jobs in the privacy market.
What the hell
Ron,
happened at the end of 2022, Jared, for that
well,
to
I'll
drop?
tell you. I can tell you specifically. Mark Zuckerberg laid off 10,000 people. The Nasdaq crashed by
Okay.
nearly 40%, and everybody started firing full-time people. And big tech in the first 3 quarters of 2023 laid off more people than they had in the last 5 years. Remember the Microsoft, Google, and everybody Meta combined? It was like 270,000 people. Engineers were out of work for the first time in decades. So this was a cataclysmic moment for America's job market. And a lot of privacy professionals have had a difficulty getting back in at the rate that they were making in 21 and 22.
Okay.
But that's what happened. Everybody started getting laid off. Big tech sort of shrunk. But also, as we know, which is why we're all here, AI entered the world in the most meaningful way in the fourth quarter of 2022. And it's taken us 2 years now to get from market collapse to now market at the highest it's ever been, with jobs sort of in the middle, right? Which is why we've got sort of a stagnant, flat job market as opposed to what we saw in 2022, which was rapid acceleration and growth. Next slide. So when we do an analysis on LinkedIn, we have the ability to go in through some technology that we've built and partner with LinkedIn and use to sort of look at how job seekers code themselves in terms of skills that they have, and how hiring managers code the jobs that they post with those same category codes. And so when we look at job seekers, professionals on LinkedIn who have privacy plus AI governance skills that they've self-coded themselves as, it's about 1.7 million people, almost 1.8 million people, but only 2,433 jobs that post desired skill sets that fit that same categorization. It's just fascinating, right? So that job market is still very new, very green, and emerging. Now, if we go a little further and we look at privacy plus governance without the AI, it's about the same, which makes sense. But the amount of jobs drops by about 1,000. So having the AI governance piece actually creates more opportunity for you, in theory. And if you just take privacy and compliance, it's actually less people, but more jobs, which sort of makes sense, right? Privacy is normally sat in compliance. There's a lot of compliance, privacy married jobs that companies have to have that are in banking, financial, brokerage, healthcare, all the HIPAA, right? Those jobs don't go away. I just don't know if those programs grow in a deregulated environment, but they'll be maintained, right? Now, let's take a look at all of this when we take out the privacy piece and we look at AI. So when we take AI plus governance without privacy, meaning these are people who say, I have AI and governance skills, but I'm not in privacy. You see how far the talent pool drops. It drops immensely from 1.7 million to less than 400,000 and only 217 jobs. Now, if we look at AI plus compliance, it's even more fascinating. People who are compliance but not privacy and not governance, AI and compliance, only 100,000 people are self-coding themselves that, and only 52 jobs are looking for talent like that. So what does this all say? I mean, it's back to the thesis that I outlined, which is the AI governance jobs and the skills needed for them are going to need to pull from the privacy community because that's who's got the skills. That's who's been harnessing AI governance skills largely, for the most part, at least en masse, for the last 2 years. As more jobs start to grow proportional to the people that have those skills, we're going to see salaries start to increase because the market will become more competitive. People will be fighting over the same people, which is exactly what happened to privacy in 2013 and then again in 2018. You lived through that, right, Ron? I mean, in corporate America, you remember those moments where there was opportunity abundant because there was so much change at the top. And we'll probably see that starting at the top in AI governance over the next few years. Some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's generally accepted in the industry and among, my peer set that as privacy professionals, as CPOs, as privacy leaders, that we truly do possess the baseline to go ahead and attack AI governance. Like, above and beyond just privacy, your CISO, but compliance and specifically privacy, we're well suited to merge into this new role. So that just makes sense. And I think, as another missed opportunity for executive teams, it doesn't make sense to not look internally at who can handle AI governance with first, prior to putting out a requisition for someone that might magically be AI governance, 7 years. I actually saw one requisition quite recently that required 7 to 8+ years of AI governance experience, which made no sense to me.
Right, because they had
but
an
yeah,
AI chatbot write it, Ron. Right?
exactly. Here is the holy grail of what a person should have. But
Right.
yeah, so again, I think just to reiterate the fact that these jobs are going to be pulling from the existing pool of folks in privacy, and that's why all of us are kind of jumping on this bandwagon of getting more AI, experience, not only from a governance perspective, but even I go down the rabbit hole of, the technical machinations of what's happening so that I feel educated and am able to provide that value. So
A
yeah.
million percent. And it's going to have a ripple effect in privacy programs that handle both responsibilities, meaning, as you said, most companies, as you see here, 2,433 jobs. And those aren't necessarily leadership jobs. Those are just privacy and AI governance. Probably less than half of them are leadership jobs. Most of them are probably mid-market jobs because that's what the market really wants right now. Companies are going to be much more likely to give a raise or a bonus to someone that they know, that they trust, that's embedded in their organization. But then that person's going to lose bandwidth as they take on more responsibility. They're going to then train their deputies. Those deputies will train their subordinates. And what will be left is a privacy AI governance program that has a bunch of stuff with no handler, like
Mm-hmm.
PIAs, like customization of a data mapping module in a software application, like ROPA, like contract review and analysis. All these things that there is a robust contract pool of talent available for hiring managers to go out and say, I need this augmentation, and then I don't need them anymore. We're moving into Latin America. I need somebody who understands the regulatory environment there. Then I need them to train some of our people here on that knowledge, and then I may not need them anymore. I need somebody to come in and help us with, expanding how we use Transcend. And maybe I don't need them after they help us with that agenda. It becomes a finite project. We achieve a goal and then they go help another customer do the same thing, right? We're seeing that become how people are supplementing when they can't get the direct hire or full-time headcount, but are losing bandwidth. And Ron, you were there when I asked this question at Kinsero to 100 CPOs. I said, how many of you feel like your salaries and compensation have grown relative to your responsibilities? And obviously there was a big
Crickets.
chuckle. Yeah, everybody laughed and nobody raised their hand because nobody feels like they've been. You're going to see companies start to spend that money on making sure they don't lose some of those key stakeholders. And I said this a year ago, and I said it again this year at Kinsero, and I'll say it to everybody now. Now's the time for chief privacy officers and leaders in privacy, whatever your title is, to start advocating for those raises, to start advocating for those titles in order to start securing your position in the organization for scale.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will say firstly that probably don't need someone to come in and implement Transcend because we're so automated. That's
There
fine.
you go. I love it. Even
But
better.
I guess I will say, Jared, that, in addition to asking for those raises and that new, title, demand budget for education as well.
Yeah.
Demand that you are fully supported and equipped by your company to address these new needs. I think that's really critical. So I just wanted to add that as a total ask, make sure that you're being well supported from an educational and just broader resource perspective.
Yeah, and it may not just be yourself you're evangelizing for in terms of education. There may be other stakeholders who, by getting them the education needed, are now going to allow you to be more successful getting the buy-in and budget you need to scale your program. Let's dive into just some nuts and bolts of financial numbers of what we're tracking on AI governance compensation benchmarks. You can see here, we sort of tried to break it down. These titles are amorphous, but they're sort of to try to compartmentalize skills as we see them being defined. And as Ron said, I'll be honest, I'll see some job descriptions that look like they were catch-alls, right? My dream candidate, 8-page long job descriptions that are all of these, and you're like, let's harness it. but we're seeing a min and a median and a max, meaning at the top end of what people are advertising. It's important to distinguish this data as advertised data. This is data we're collecting off of LinkedIn or company websites for ranges where they're posting salary data. Here's what's troubling about this data. Go ahead, hit it, MT. That little animation says it all. The median, the middle, the average salary for what we're seeing on these jobs is far closer to the minimum than it is to the maximum. Meaning, more companies are paying less, not the higher end of these ranges, right? This is the median. This median then is exacerbated when we compare it to the salaries we're seeing privacy pros accept for similarly titled and responsible positions. So MT, let's go to the next one. We'll look at privacy compensation benchmarks. You could see here that we've broken it down sort of Fortune big tech. Those are much higher than healthcare, biopharma, health tech. And then we've got financial, telecom, entertainment. We just started put them in these buckets in order to give some ranges that are similar. There are obviously outliers here, but this is the most maybe critical thing. These ranges haven't really changed for 12 months. So, they may have fluctuated within the range, but we haven't seen the ranges noticeably move up in the way that we did in 21 and 22, where they went up nearly 30 to 40%, pretty much across the board. So the whole privacy job market, if you made a job move in 21 and 22, you probably are making 20 to 40% more than you were making before that. For those of you that didn't make that job move and haven't gotten raises of that level, the opportunity for you to probably make a move and exponentiate your earning potential is coming around the corner in mid 25 and into 26. Let's compare these two. So what we've done here is AI governance is advertised. This is the median, the at point of higher privacy median. And the difference in that data is this is what we're actually seeing people accept jobs at versus what companies say they will pay, or what somebody when surveyed says that they're making. This is actually people that have taken jobs that we're tracking. You could see here that there's not a single one of these where the AI governance median is higher than the privacy median. And in some places, it's incredibly disparate, right? Particularly at the lower and very top levels. In the middle, it gets a little closer, which I guess makes sense just in a sort of, I don't know, mathematical, the world is yin and yang kind of way. But I think this is the trouble with the market right now and why you see so many AI governance jobs, either A, filled by people that don't really have the skills asked for in the job, who will either rise to the occasion and wind up being a great investment that the corporation made in somebody that they groomed, or, which we're seeing a lot more of, we made the wrong hire. We need to go spend more money to get the right hire. We don't have the time to wait for this person to figure it out. And we don't necessarily have the leadership in place to guide this person to figure it out. We're seeing a lot more of that. People that didn't use recruiters, went out on their own, thought that they could, reach into that 1.7 million person pocket and figure out who's going to be right for them. And a lot of them made mishires. And so I think we're going to see a lot of rehiring and shuffling of the deck on the AI governance side. Maybe not quite as much on the privacy side, because salaries there are sort of maintained. But what we're not seeing are people willing to walk away from their privacy AI gov job to take a fully AI gov job at 13 to 45% less than what they're making.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jared. I wouldn't I think it's maybe a missed opportunity again to focus a requisition on completely on AI governance. If you're not getting, for example, an analyst, if they're not maybe at a generalist level in terms of expertise, that's kind of a waste of budget and resources, because I suspect that if you're not maybe one of the big tech companies, you're not exclusively doing AI projects 24/7, right? So I think getting someone that has that broader kind of, jack of all trades compliance experience is a better hire and probably a better investment. So yeah, I just think it's interesting that there are requisitions that are actually just exclusively focused on AI governance, because me personally speaking, and from a practical perspective, I would want someone that's more of a generalist. Anyway, so yeah, interesting stats.
Which is more of what we're seeing, right? I mean, when we go and look at the amount of privacy jobs, it's a lot more than that 2,400 AI gov. The privacy jobs are a lot more than that. They're 16, 15,000, right? Compared to 3,000. So there are more jobs in privacy, and some of those have AI gov baked into them, but maybe not as meaningfully, right? Maybe they're just scratching the surface. And also, I think something to keep in mind is the education piece you described before, I think, is a strategy a lot have started to implement by educating those they have and saying, I'm not going to go to market and hire an AI gov person. I'm going to make one from someone I have. And then all the stuff that they did for privacy or compliance that they don't have time to do anymore, that's what I'm going to go hire someone for, because I can go do that at a reasonable rate. I know what I'm looking for. The pool's available. I can get it FTE. I could get a contract, but I go try to find that AI gov person, and you're all over the board. You're experimenting while you're staffing, often.
Absolutely. And a bit of a side note and tangent to this concept of AI
Yeah.
governance. When I was at the DPC in Brussels, one of the questions I was asking at our booth at Transcend was, what does AI governance mean to you? And it's such a varied response. And also, a lot of folks were caught in the headlights essentially when I asked this question, because above and beyond just policies and procedures and your typical governance when it comes to any compliance vertical, folks are still struggling with what AI governance means to them. Whether it's, again, establishing a committee dedicated to AI and having relevant folks at that committee. We're still kind of meshing through and kind of formulating in our minds what an AI governance is and what a professional is supposed to be doing as an AI governance professional. So just also some insight there on the ground.
Yeah, I agree. And we see that in the job requisitions that we get, that are literally, some of them, like 6, 7 pages, because they don't know how to determine what's most important. They got a lot of different stakeholders in the organization that want a lot of different things achieved by somebody being brought in to head this function. Um, I think, to your point also, like, when I hear you say, like, forming a committee, like, that's good, but I think the people who are going to get more budget and buying are going to be getting into the weeds of this a little more meaningfully. And it's nice to be able to stay strategic consultative. But even in some of our other areas like cybersecurity and e-discovery and traditional info gov, the people that are wielding AI tech are the leaders. They're the ones testing this. They're the ones figuring out what the vendor selection process should be, what questions we're asking our vendors that we need to now codify into an onboarding process or part of our procurement process, and then educating that procurement team on these checks and balances for anything as it relates to not just AI, but the use of our data as it might be proliferated for AI internally or externally. And those, like, I'd want that kind of answer if I asked that question, right? Or, we're using technology to assess how we can access more opt-in data and deliver that to our marketing department with metrics on a dashboard that shows them what the return rate is of clicks, opens, and buys from the website based on marketing blasts we've helped initiate with new user data. I mean, I wish some of my CPOs would talk to me that way, right? You got to get in the weeds, maybe, is the guidance. All right, a few other bits of guidance. We've sort of covered this. Executive AI governance jobs likely going to be created, not staffed for. And so this trickle-down effect of taking responsibility, training your deputies, and then using privacy contractors or privacy full-time headcount from the bottom up. Since you can't really hire AI from the bottom up, it doesn't exist yet, and there's not really a contractor pool. The other thing for privacy programs that have grown to encompass AI governance, but have not grown proportionally in human capital, whose employees are burnt out, maybe haven't gotten raises, your staff are at the highest risks of employee attrition in 2025, and prepare accordingly. And then train to retain existing staff and hire contractors to backfill those commoditized privacy necessities that don't go away, but perhaps don't necessarily need to be fulfilled by the people that you're leveling up in the program. All right.
All great guidance.
Let's talk about this, because we've talked about it a lot, contract versus direct hire. And, Ron, I was telling you before we started this call today that I was sort of surprised at Consero. And just so people understand Consero, it's an event where we not only speak, Ron and I and others, but we sort of get to speed date CPOs, right? We're getting one-on-one 20 to 30-minute interactions with dozens of CPOs over the course of several days. And that intimate opportunity to talk candidly with them one-on-one and really focus on them is very illuminating. And what it really illuminated to me is the privacy community has not yet shifted from a primarily contract to hire modality to a primarily full-time hiring capacity the way that they were, in 21 and 22, right? This chart looks very different when we go back into 21 and 22. This chart is contract versus FTE over the course of this year only. And you can see there were only 2 months where full-time hiring in February and August actually exceeded the amount of contract opportunities that we saw filled. This is exacerbated by the speed of hire for privacy slowed pretty aggressively in the middle of the year, meaning people just took their sweet time filling these jobs. But when contract jobs come up, they don't take their sweet time. They fill them very quickly. They tend to fill in about a week or two. What we're seeing right now is actually the highest peaks of contract utilization for privacy programs the entire year. September, October, November were all almost 70, 75%, 65%, 78%. That's the highest we've seen it. Part of it is a lot of new jobs got posted that are full-time that are not yet filled, that probably won't fill until the end of this month or even into January and February. But as the volume of temp work increases relative to that, this is based on who's actually accepting positions. And what we're seeing and what I heard at Concero is people are going to be able to use contractors, but not that many people got more full-time headcount.
Quick question, Jared. Any data on what level these contract roles are? Are they the more operational analyst level roles, or are we talking director level? Any insight
Yeah,
there?
so it's mostly mid-market, right? Mid-market meaning program manager, analyst, project manager, lawyer, tactical lawyer. There are some roles, though it's not the bulk of these, that are what we would consider consultative strategic, like an interim CPO. CPO is a service, or a very high-level engineer doing privacy by design work on rolling out a product for a customer as the privacy go-to, and then sort of getting out of the way. But the
Makes
most of
sense.
what we see is operational analysts, lawyers to come in and, handle ROPA, operational PIA, DPIA, technology implementation,
Makes
customization.
sense.
Yeah, those are the
Oh,
bulk of the roles. But there's something for everybody, right? I mean, I wouldn't discourage executives coming to us because we're constantly, proactively saying, we've got really special people available. Do you want to take advantage of them? Looking for where our customers have holes in their human capital that this person could come and plug for a short time or knowledge transfer to somebody that's already an employee and then get out of the way, as opposed to outsourcing it to outside counsel at 5 times the cost, sometimes 10 times the cost, right? All right, let's take a look at the whole year. All right, let's take a look at year over year. This is exactly what I was talking about, Ron. You can see that in pretty much every year, with the exception of 2020, up until 2024, that full-time hiring exceeded contracting. And this year was the first year that we saw contracting completely dwarf full-time hiring. The reason in 2020 that we saw it is because of COVID and because of the pandemic and because of economic uncertainty and 14% unemployment. People just hired contractors and weren't willing to hire full-time people, didn't get that headcount. But that rebounded really fast in 2021. And maintained pretty aggressively in 2022. If we threw out the fourth quarter of 2022, the full-time hiring trend would actually be a lot higher than it was in 2021. But because Q4 of 2022 was so disastrous, Zuckerberg laying off 10,000 people, big tech layoffs, the NASDAQ, S&P, Dow dropping 30, 40%. We saw everybody really switch modalities very quickly to contract staffing. And that's sort of persisted, generally speaking, throughout the last 2 years. As you can see in 2025, we're predicting it will flip. If I'm honest, I'm starting to second guess that prediction a little bit. I'd like to say that we're going to see the amount of full-time hiring, but what we're also seeing are a ton of full-time jobs being posted that just don't ever get filled, or often that are full-time jobs posted and then we wind up putting a contractor in to fulfill the need and they don't, wind up using a full-time headcount resource. So it's a very shifting marketplace. You can't trust what you see online as gospel. There's a lot of nuance to what's happening behind the scenes.
Well, we'll see next quarter's call, I suppose.
We will. It's also worth mentioning that 40% of our contractors are converting to full-time employees since the beginning of 23. That's an astronomically high number. That number is usually like 12%. 90% of those people that were offered are accepting those offers, which is also astronomically high, right? Contracting is usually a modality and a lifestyle. Now it's a way to get a full-time job in privacy. And just to give hiring managers and job seekers a sense, 234 days is the average number of days that we're tracking right now before a contractor is offered conversion. So it takes about 3 quarters before we're seeing people say, we want to keep you full-time and here's an offer. And just to show you how different that is than in 2022, it was at 151. Right?
Wow.
So, and that number is ticking down. In September, it's at 245. So we're actually seeing people convert a little faster, slowly. When you look at contractor length of assignment, forget about conversion, but just how long they last, you could see that whether they converted or got another job or just didn't need them anymore, in 2022 it was only 152. In 2023, that goes up a little bit to 168. And in 2024, you could see it's now at 284 days is the average length of an assignment, which is longer than the average length that people are taking to convert. And you can see here the difference in those days. It's extended. So people are hiring more contractors. They're keeping them on longer. They're waiting longer to decide whether or not they want to hire them full-time. And they can do that because there aren't as many full-time jobs available for these people as there were in 2022, where if you didn't convert somebody at 152 days, you might lose them because they'd take another full-time job, and there were plenty out there. There aren't plenty out there anymore, right? 41,000 versus 16 and 15,000. That's why you're seeing this contractor length of assignment be longer, and the timeline with which people take to convert them also be longer. And, if you're asking yourself, who cares? The reason I care is because I want to give a sense of contractors of like, this is how long you should expect, right? Don't go into a job contract to hire and expect you're going to get an offer in 60 days or 90 days. That's not what the market is telling us. The market's telling us 234 days. And that if you're at your 284th day and you haven't been offered a conversion, you're probably not going to be, right? That's also what it's telling us. Because
Do you think there's a little bit of remote work influence there as well, Jared?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Because there is a accelerated pool of people that are willing to take contract jobs in order to stay remote, because most contract jobs are remote. And one of the reasons why so many privacy programs are hiring contractors is because they can't find the people they want to come into the office location that they're being required for an FTE to adhere to. But if they hire a contractor, all bets are off. They can work anywhere. So some people are saying, well, let me just get a contractor in now to help. And maybe I can make the case that we should hire them remote, or that'll buy me more time while I look for a full-time hire, or other scenarios that we can unpack. But yeah, that is definitely part of the equation.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating few years. 65% of our customers are engaging in both modalities. My guidance to people that are running privacy programs or AI governance programs is you've got to consider contract staffing as a part of your program habitually, not just when you're hitting panic or lose somebody or have a paternity leave. It should be an ongoing consideration of how you augment your program. 90% of our contractors are finishing their assignment, got converted, or are still on assignment. Only 3% wind up taking a full-time offer somewhere else and leaving a contract. And I share that statistic not to brag, but to dispel the myth that if I hire a contractor, the minute that a full-time job comes along, they're going to leave me. This data tells us that this is not the case, that they're more likely to stay and hope they get converted, and probably won't start looking until they cross that 250-day threshold and feel like they won't get converted. And that's where these 3% come in. But there's this myth out there, if I hire a contractor, they're going to go away as soon as they find a full-time job. And we're just not finding that. All right,
That
Ron,
makes sense. I mean, yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, if I, as a contractor, if I'm investing my time and, you know, if I see some potential for longevity at this company, I'm not going to be looking around. I'll definitely be wanting to see what materializes with this existing contractor relationship. So makes sense.
Before we dive into this slide, let's take a couple questions real quick. Do you see a trend in ghost job postings in privacy? So I'll respond to that by saying there's a
Yeah.
trend in all industries for ghost job postings, not just privacy. I don't have any data that would suggest privacy is more or less than the rest of the world, but there was a great article in the Times about 6 or 7 months ago that said, I think the statistic was about 18 to 22% of all jobs that are posted online are not real jobs. They are data collection exercises. They're companies gathering market intelligence or gathering personal information while they can. And that resonates with me because we chase those jobs, right? So we chase them, and sometimes we figure out after a lot of chasing that like this actually is not a real job. So yeah, it's out there. There's no real way to know what's a ghost posting and what's not. I would say that if you see the same job posted and then reposted and then reposted, that's usually a good indicator that something is awry. Next question. What is the average mid-market privacy role hiring time cycle? Are firms using in-house TA or seeking agency assistance to fill privacy roles? And are you seeing a trend to hire internationally global delivery models at lower rates? Ron, maybe you might take the last part. I'm curious to hear what you're seeing about that last part, hiring internationally for same skill, lower cost. Is that a trend you're seeing?
I mean, I think it depends on what this resource would be doing. Maybe for kind of the more tactical operational pieces of a program around D-star fulfillment, kind of that first level, triage of privacy operations, maybe, but not for kind of the more substantive roles. I wouldn't be outsourcing that to just anyone because they're lower rate in a certain country. I don't think that's a trend I'm seeing. No.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would
Yeah.
agree with you. Where I would say there's exception is I do think a lot of software companies, whether they're in privacy or not, are aggressively outsourcing their development in other areas, whether it be
Oh,
India,
sure. Yep.
Albania, Montenegro, Poland. These are all hotbeds for that kind of work. But I also, to kind of riff on the question, I do see a lot of programs creating what we would call a follow the sun programmatic approach, meaning they have an international footprint and a global service response that is 24/7 that can follow the sun. So if there's a problem in India, there's somebody in the India, Singapore, APAC time zone that can support those privacy concerns. And I am seeing that happening, particularly at highly regulated medical device supply companies, pharmaceutical companies, banking, financial brokerage. You'll see a lot of that as they operationalize privacy as a response team, right?
Hmm.
But I would agree with you that DSAR we do see going to low cost centers. DSAR is like that one thing, and contract review, and sometimes
Right.
incident response. Honestly,
Yeah.
if it's
And
big.
potentially privacy impact assessment, kind of the pre-fill of that. Because if we look at Facebook, that privacy program manager is like a dime a dozen. Yeah, right at this point.
Yeah.
So I feel that's probably, yeah, that sounds right.
And then to your top question, the average mid-market privacy hiring time cycle is different depending on if you're going directly through an organization in talent acquisition or through a third-party agency. Whether or not organizations are using one or the other, it's pretty mixed. I mean, there are plenty of organizations that don't use agencies that you will have to apply directly for. And that timeline is usually 5 times longer than the timeline of using an agency, certainly 5 times longer than using true staffing partners, because we've tracked that and we've got data on that. I don't know if we've got it in this deck, but if that individual reaches out to me, Jim, I'm happy to share that information with you. We've actually got a chart that shows what we call the DIY staffing approach versus using true staffing partners purely on speed on a role by role basis. So we could show you how long it takes you to DIY find a CPO versus through True versus privacy engineer DIY through True. And it's generally 3 to 5 times longer when they're doing it on their own. And you ask yourself, well, why? Forget about we know what we're looking for and we specialize in this. There's a renaissance happening with AI in the staffing industry, just as much as there's a renaissance happening in the AI governance and privacy space. And as talent acquisition tries to wrap their mind around how to use that both compliantly and for efficiency's sake, they're also being bombarded with so many resumes and so many unqualified applicants, just to give you a sense of like what we deal with on an ongoing daily basis, we get anywhere between 7 and 15,000 applicants a week, and less than 250 of those a week are actually even qualified for the jobs that we have posted, right? Bartenders, lawyers that have nothing to do with privacy, uh, construction workers. I mean, you name it. Like, people are applying to jobs blindly. LinkedIn has a quick apply button that is the curse of my existence, which allows people to essentially just go click, 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 click. I think a lot of talent acquisition professionals are struggling with how to manage that data. And that's just one of the advantages of using a staffing agency. It's going to happen a lot faster. And it seems unimportant in a down economy or in a flat job market, but it becomes a critical competitive advantage if you're chasing candidates that have 2 or 3 other offers and you're able to move 90 to 120 days faster in getting them an offer than the 2 other companies they're interviewing that don't have agency representation. So, whether or not you're choosing to use an agency isn't just about identification, it's about delivery and being able to beat the competition, not just on speed, but on a lot of other things too. Okay.
Quick question and
Yes.
serious question for you, Jared. If that bartender had their AIGP, would you be considering them for a role?
Well, if they had their AIGP, they'd get through the filter, right? Because we do have filters in
Yeah.
place. It's simple ones that, like, if you apply for a job in privacy and the word privacy is not on your resume, you're not going to get a call from True Staffing Partners, right? Basic stuff. But yeah, it would get through, but at some point, it would become clear, eventually to a human eye, if not, an AI technology, that this person has no practical application of that certification, that this person is a bartender who went out and self-certified, and we value self-education and can promote that if we really fall in love with somebody. But if they don't have the skill sets necessary, the expectation should not be that you're going to get a call from every place you apply for just because you have some of the skills that are on that job description.
Good to know.
Yeah. Okay. We'll breeze through this quickly because we're about to run out of time. I want to make sure we don't get to anything else that's really critical. These are the top 10 reasons, and they are in order, that we're seeing customers use privacy hiring contractors. You could see contract to hire is the number 2 reason. Not having full-time headcount approval is the number 1. You could also see the defense against FTE attrition and burnout is up there, and is a real reason. We've had a lot of people out on leave too for FMLA or paternity and maternity. Next slide, MT. So this is the magic 11th reason. I think we've covered this with leadership sort of taking on AI gov, training their deputies. That middle management is delegating now to subordinates. The subordinates are running out of bandwidth. They have, they maxed out on utilization. That's where they're bringing in contractors to do that commoditized privacy work. ROPA, DPAs, DPIAs. We're seeing that pretty aggressively trending right now. So here's our guidance. Make contract documentation ongoing part of your program. Obviously, I've said that a lot on this call. Leverage fractional contractors for baseline privacy tasks. Staffing contract to hire has a very high success rate, a 90% acceptance rate. Again, I think it's easier sometimes for a program manager to say, let's hire Ron, as opposed to give me the budget to hire for this role. This role is important. If Ron is in there and he's contracting for it and he's doing great work, and we can point to a human being with a work product, deliverable, that sometimes becomes easier for you to get the budget to convert them because we don't want to lose them. Reallocate budget from outside counsel and consulting firm spend to gain more resources at a lower cost. For every contract attorney that we have out on our payroll, their outside counsel, counterpart probably bills 5 to 10 times the same rate. And the fastest way to provide support to a business is through a contractor. We have a little bit more data. We've got a little bit more time. Yes, we talked about this a little bit. Election results on privacy and AI governance. Maybe a good way to kind of wrap up what we talked about at the top of the call. Weak regulatory enforcement, shifting budgets away from compliance and towards business opportunity. This is back to the missed opportunity idea matrix. Shift to contract and flexible roles, right? CFOs particularly are going to encourage the businesses in the first 2 quarters to maximize their bottom line. Contractors don't hit analysis the same way full-time employees do in terms of cost analysis that helps determine stock price. So this is an important thing to consider. litigation is going to drive demand. So deregulation always leads to litigation. And so areas in privacy where there's litigation risk are the risk areas that I would focus on. A lot of people are worried about that. And I think those are good risks to bring up because litigation can be very expensive, far more expensive than regulatory fines. And the US fragmentation, I don't think we're going to see a federal privacy law under the new administration. And if we do, I mean, Ron, you tell me what you think. You're a more regulatory expert than I. I just don't think it'll have any teeth that will change the fractured nature of having to deal with so many different laws in so many different states here in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I bet my money that we're not going to get something at the federal level with this administration in particular. I just think there's just a decreased focus on that, especially given, traditionally Republican perspectives have been less regulation and more reliance on what the individual states are doing. So yeah, I bet my money on not.
And Ron, what's your perspective on, will the same thing happen with AI? Are we just going to see the states decide how their state, and we're going to have essentially maybe a similar moment that we had when CCPA came out and Colorado came out, and then quickly lots of others followed, where we had to ramp up on AI regulation on a state by state basis?
Yeah, unfortunately I think, we will see probably a couple more states come up with their own iterations or their own requirements. But we're even seeing with the Colorado AI Act, the Colorado AG said that even though it's been put out there in its current form, that he expects a lot of it to be actually either rolled back or heavily revised.
Yeah.
So I think we're and that's job security for us. The fact that we are always needing to be on top of the state patchwork of not only privacy laws, but now biotech, biotech laws and health information laws and kids laws, all of these things, that we have to deal with on a day to day, is the unfortunate reality, but also good for us. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
say it all the time. It's like this conflicting inner, dialogue of, part of the reason I think so many of us got into privacy is the altruism of protecting our rights, our own privacy, our children's privacy. That's what inspired us to get into this space. But it's a business. And over the next 4 years, we've got to treat it like a business if we want to move it forward. And this deregulated environment and the opportunities that are in front of us with AI are going to run wild for a few years. And those that take advantage of it stand to gain before things start to roll back and regulate and we find our pace. But until then, get on the train or you're going to get left behind.
absolutely. Join us.
We have a few seconds for any final questions that anybody has. We've got 2 minutes left. Let me check the Q&A. Oh, yes, we do have a few additional questions. Let's just zip through these quickly. Oh, interesting. Well, we have a question of what percentage of applicants do you receive are offshore, and are they generally considered qualified? I'll answer that in a kind of roundabout way, which is we do receive a lot of applicants who are offshore. If we have jobs in areas where they can work, then great. But what we often find are many professionals are seeking visa sponsorship. And visa sponsorship is very hard to come by. It is very difficult to get. It is not something people should have a lot of hope for under this new administration in terms of it being grown or expanded, quite the opposite. So please understand that if you're applying for a job and that job will require you to get a visa, you're probably wasting your time right now. Yeah.
That aligns with what I'm seeing too, Jared. A lot of companies are scaling back their visa supported positions. So yeah, that's definitely what I'm seeing out there.
We are at the hour, Ron. As always, it is an honor to be able to talk with you and share our talks with the community. If you want to connect with Ron or I on LinkedIn, follow these QR codes. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I will respond to you. I respond to everybody personally who reaches out to me. It is not a robot, I promise. It's really me. We welcome your outreach. We're here to represent you. We're here to help you fill your jobs. And if you're shopping for technology, you need to know about Transcend. Ron, final thoughts?
Yeah, for me, a robot responds on my behalf, unfortunately, on LinkedIn. So if you're no, feel free to reach out to and connect with me. I love meeting new folks as part of my role as field CPO at Transcend. So if you have any questions about my experience or about stuff that we talked about here, please reach out. But Jared, amazing session, and I look forward to next quarter.
Join us in March, everyone. You will get follow-up from me, inviting you and sharing the link with you to register for our March webinar. I think we're going to have a lot of new, interesting data to share with everybody then. And until then, happy holidays and happy New Year.
Bye, everyone.